feels like a better fish.
Hey, what's up guys? Nick the Informative Fisherman here, and today I'm going to be doing a video on beginner bait fishing for trout. I'm going to show you the most simplest method to get started out there on any lake, summer, winter, fall, spring, you name it, to go catch trout. And a lot of people are going to show you elaborate methods for catching them, and you know myself, I'm a professional angler in a multitude of species. You know, I've cashed checks in many of them, but I'm going to show you the most simplest form to get it done with. First of all, if you've never fished before, check out my video on Introduction to Fishing, and that's going to help you out a little bit more. I have a spinning reel basics video out there you can check out as well, and rod action, meaning understanding why your rod bends, how long it bends, how far back it bends, you know, so you can get a better understanding of those. Now, first off, what we're going to talk about when it comes to trout fishing is there's a variety of trout out there. You have mixed breeds of trouts, but most stock trout in lakes are rainbow trout. You know, there's a few different types, but generally you fish for them all the same way. So what we're going to start off with is the rod and reel. Basically, all you need is a spinning rod, and a spinning rod and a spinning reel. And if you see this little wire here, the bail on the reel, this is your spinning reel, and your spinning rod generally has the bigger eye closer down to the reel, and then it tapers off towards the tip. You can use any rod from 6 foot in length out to 9 foot in length. It doesn't really matter if you're bank fishing. The advantage you get over a longer rod is you have more leverage. When you pick it up, it's going to fasten that line and put the hook on the fish faster because you're moving more line. The shorter rod, you're moving less line. So you have to think about it in that sense. When you look at your rod, you're going to look at the rating system right down here. You want a medium or a medium light rod. And when you look at your line class, it's going to be right down there, and it's going to say lure, line, and it's going to show you 4 to 12 pound line, 6 to 15. Generally, you want a rod that can handle 4 to 12 pounds. And the basic line we're going to be getting started off with is 8 pound tests. This line right here is copolymer. This is a line that's a mixture between fluorocarbon line and monofilament line. I'm not going to really get you into that too far right now. What you just want to know is you're going to start off with 8 pound monofilament line. And this is for, monofilament is going to be for your winter, your spring, and your fall. And the reason for this is trout are going to be shallow around those times. And monofilament line floats. So shallow water, floating line's not too big of a deal. But when we're in the summertime, the middle of the summer, the trout are going to be moving deeper. The sun gets out higher, you have higher ultraviolet days, warmer days, the trout are going to start moving down deeper along with the bait fish. So that's when we're going to start using fluorocarbon line. And these are two different lines. The monofilament floats and it has stretch. The fluorocarbon is almost invisible. It has very little stretch and it sinks. The reason why we're going to use it in the summertime, the fluorocarbon, is because we're going to have less big bow in our line. It's not going to be floating up, and we're going to feel the bites much better when we're fishing deeper and really far out there. So we're getting started with 8 pound line. In the spring, fall, or winter, we're using monofilament. In those hotter months from, let's say, June, early June through mid-September to late September, we're going to be using fluorocarbon line, and then we're going to go back to the mono. So those are two good choices to work through. Now, what you want to focus on when you get out there, I'm going to show you the rig in a minute, but what you want to focus on is finding trout. And when I say finding trout, what this means is if we go out to any spot on the shoreline and we cast out there, realistically, we're just hoping. We're not finding the fish. You know, we got to get out there. The fish really, you know, hold in about 5% of the water, and so that means 95% of the water realistically doesn't have a fish in it. So if we have no clue where the fish are, guess what? We're throwing blindly, and we're just hoping that they come along and eat our bait. So what we want to focus on when you're just getting started on trout fishing, if you go out to the lake and you have the wind blowing in your face, you're in a good spot. Also, if you're on one of those spots of the lake where you have a big point that tapers out and wind blowing on it, that's even a better spot. And the reason for this is the wind blows microorganisms, which those little minnows and all the other little crustaceans and stuff in the water feed on. And those little minnows and crustaceans are what rainbow trout feed on. They feed on minnows, they feed on shad, crawdads, worms, grubs, anything else the wind's going to blow up to that bank. So therefore, if you're fishing with the wind blowing to your back, realistically there's not going to be as many fish in that spot. Wind's blowing in your face, you're in a good spot. Those lake points that stick out, The reason why these are so good is they hold fish year round because they hold structure. There's rocks, there's cover, there's crawdads, there's minnows, and the wind always blows from one side or another or straight at it. So it's always catching a lot of food, therefore holding a lot of life year round. So that's always a good spot to target trout if you find one of those big points sticking out of your lake, and I'll tell you exactly why here.
This episode of The Informative Fisherman is brought to you by... Ever tried pulling a planer board next to your boat when trolling or fishing from a swift current bank? If not, you're missing out on one of the most phenomenal fish catching machines on the market today. With Yellowbird planer boards pulling your lines perpendicular to your boat, you can't help but catch more fish. Find out more by visiting www.yellowbirdproducts.com. Have you had the chance to fish the baddest hoochie on the market today? That's right, I'm talking about the Shasta Tackle Wiggle Hoochie, one of the most dynamic reaction trout and salmon lures that runs second to no other for pulling and triggering fish into striking. So I guess the real question is, are you catching all the fish you should be catching? Did you ever wish for an RC boat when you were a kid? And do you have a passion for fishing? Well, guess what? It's time to do them both at the same time. With RCFishingWorld.com's RC Fishing Pole, it's time to be a kid again. So visit www.rcfishingworld.com today.
Hey, what's up guys? Nick the Informative Fisherman here, and when it comes to spooling up my reels, I choose nothing less than the best, and that's why I use P-line each and every time. Are you fishing the best?
P-line, baby. P-line.
Have you been to rustylures.com? Did you know they offer free shipping on anything over $29.99? And with all the latest and greatest in bass fishing gear, from punching tackle, umbrella rigs, swim baits, and you name it, there's really no reason for you not to be getting the best deal online today. So go to www.rustylures.com. Now let's get back to the show.
So fishing those main lake points. And what I mean by this, let's say you get out and you see it sticks out way into the lake. You could see the angle on that, all right? So you could say, well, I'm going to imagine it's 20 foot deep right about there, because you see it dropping down like that, the point out into the water. You see it coming down here. So you see that angle going down. So you know it's probably about 20 feet right there, probably about 50 feet right there. Now, how does this work to your advantage? Well, in the winter time, the trout will often occupy the top 20 to 5 foot water column, meaning very shallow up in the top. So in the winter time, we're going to use our bobber rig, and I'm going to show you how to do that in a second here. In the summertime, the trout often move deeper. Like I said, it's getting hotter. They're going to go down deeper. And in the summer, your trout are often occupying 35 to 75 feet of water. So that's pretty deep. So by using that point as a visual and fishing right on it, you can kind of guesstimate how deep it's going to be. And instead of just throwing straight out into the lake where you don't know how deep it is, I'll tell you why this is a disadvantage to you. We have a thing called thermoclines. In the summertime and in the wintertime, you could develop a thermocline too. This is when the weather stabilizes. Therefore, the colder water pushes down to the top of the lake, the warmer and that nice and right temperature is in the middle. Well, at the bottom, that colder water, you start losing oxygen. Plant life dies, it goes down there, it consumes oxygen. Therefore, the trout won't be hanging down out in the bottom. They'll be right in between. So by fishing on a point, you know, you can find that in-between point where those trout are comfortable in feeding, not on the very bottom, not on the very top. So in the summertime, points are phenomenal for fishing. So let's get into the rigging here. All right, so the rig that I'm going to be teaching you to float fish and bottom fish is the split shot rig. It's extremely versatile and super simple. I have my line coming straight off my rod here, and this is going to go to a size 4 hook. I use size 4 and size 6 for my split shot rig. If I'm just getting out there, no matter what I'm fishing for, what type of trout I'm fishing for, this will catch fish. If the trout are a little bit bigger on average, I'll use the 4. If the trout are a little average on smaller, I'll use the 6. The numbers get smaller from 1 up to 32. From 1 backwards, it becomes 1/0, 2/0, 3/0, and they get bigger going that direction. The knot I'm going to use to tie on my hook is a Palomar knot. So I'm going to switch and show you an illustration here, and then we'll come back once I have this tied on, and you'll be able to check this illustration out and hopefully figure out how to tie it yourself. Alright, so now that we have our hook tied on, I'm going to show you something. See, I have a little bit longer shank on this hook, and when you're a beginner, I suggest using a little longer shank. If you don't understand what the part of the hook that I'm talking about, please watch my video on a better understanding of fishing hooks. So we got that tied on. Now this is very simple. This is just going up our line. This here is a split shot. See this little guy looks like a little Pac-Man? All we're gonna do is go about 18 inches to 24 inches up our line, and we're gonna squeeze it down on there. We're gonna cinch it down. We can use needle nose pliers, our fingers. You squeeze it tight with your fingers. If you're one of those people that a dentist doesn't like very much, you can bite it down. That works too. Now this is beneficial if you're fishing on the bottom. And the reason why is you can use a bait that doesn't float. You can cast it out there. It'll drop your split shot down and your bait will sit on the bottom. We often don't do that with trout fishing. When we're fishing on the bottom, we use floating bait like the dough baits here. This is like your power baits that they float. They also have some that sink and sit on the bottom, or your egg baits here. Another thing that these will do is they'll float or sit on the bottom. So you want to make sure if you're fishing on the bottom, you use ones that float. And what that's going to do is it's going to float up just like that. And a good way to test to see if you have a big enough split shot or enough split shot is toss it out in the water right in front of you. And if your weight is just barely sitting on the bottom like so, it's perfect. You don't want it floating up off the bottom because you're not going to know where your bait's at. So you can squeeze another split shot on, or you can take one off. But as long as your bait is floating just up off the bottom like so, it's perfect. That trout is a scavenger. He'll come up, he'll eat that thing. Bam, your rod will be jumping all over the place. You can pick it up and set the hook on him. Now here's another cool part about the split shot rig. I have a bobber right here. And I'm not showing you a slip bobber or anything overly elaborate. These type of bobbers, this is just like a standard stick bobber. The round bobbers, you can do it the same way. You pull that spring down, you put your line right into the clip, and you twist it around. And that'll hold your bobber onto the line. Now the benefit is, in the winter time or the springtime or the fall when the trout are up shallow, now can you use that sinking bait, the one that doesn't float, and toss this up on the surface, and that'll sink and sit right under that bobber just like so. So that split shot will hold it stable and make sure your bait's down below that bobber. And you can fish, you know, that upper 5 to 20 foot water column. 20 foot leader behind here is a little bit long, and that's when you want to start using a slip bobber at that point, and I'll teach you how to use that later on. But you know, a 5 foot leader is doable, and you can cast it out there and fish under the bobber in those colder months when those trout are up searching around shallow. You know, those summer months when those trout are deeper, you can pop that off, switch back to your floating bait and get that down there. Look at the grass on the bottom. If you have grass that looks like it's about 2 foot tall, make sure you set your split shot further down the line to where your bait floats up and above it. So when it comes to choosing your bait, how I told you the floating baits, you know, your power baits, your P-line makes good floating baits as well for trout. There's a whole variety of stuff out there. There's salmon eggs, which is a very common one. These are your salmon eggs, the little red eggs that come in the jar like so. Then you can do sweet corn. You can get canned sweet corn, and this is a really cool trick, but you have to check with some of your lakes. It might be illegal to use corn in your lake, but you get a little jar of minced garlic and sweet corn. You pour them into a sandwich baggie, soak them in there. Trout love that. You want to float that under a bobber, I guarantee you they'll eat it. You know, your salmon eggs, your power baits, your floating baits, your little soft egg baits, trout love this stuff. So they'll eat it up. So if you get out there, you know, and you're wondering where they're at, let's say it's the spring or the fall, and you're wondering if they're still deep or still shallow, you know, bring 2 rods out there, get a dual rod stamp, fish one on the bottom and fish one under a float. Fish the split shot rig on both. And you know, and you'll find them in no time. Jump around through your baits, you fish a spot for over 30 minutes and you don't catch a fish. Look for another spot where the wind's blowing your face, or a point out there where the wind's blowing food into there. Cast out to that thing and fish there. If you're having a problem, you see your line drifting across the water, that means you don't have enough weight, so add another split shot. And then your line will stop drifting around. If it's very windy, you might have a tough time with the bobber. So a good thing to know at that point is cast up there and let it drift across. That's also presenting the bait to those fish at the same time. So don't get frustrated that it's moving the whole time. Pick up, cast, let it blow across again. Trout are often cruising around looking for food. So use that wind to your advantage. It's going to drift it right across there and troll that food right through there for you. So play with your depth, go up and down off the bottom. Play with your depth off a bobber, go deeper, go shallower, and try different baits until you get bit. Once you figure out what works, I guarantee you there's going to be other trout there and you won't have any problem filling up your bag to take home for a killer dinner. I'm Nick the Informative Fisherman, and we'll see you next time.